America's most feared outlaws, men who survived countless gunfights, fell in moments when their guards dropped. Jesse James was gunned down by a friend at home. Wild Bill Hickok was shot from behind before he could draw. John Wesley Hardin, boasting over dice, never saw it coming. The West promised legendary showdowns, yet their reigns ended with betrayal, spectacle, and irony. Why did none die the death they deserved? Hit subscribe now. If you are ready for the real story behind the legends. How men like Billy the Kid and Butch Cassidy met their fate will challenge everything you think you know. Jesse James trusted Robert Ford like a younger brother. On the morning of April 3, 1882, James stood in his modest house in St. Joseph, Missouri, dusting a picture frame. The revolver he usually wore sat unused on the mantel. Robert Ford, eyes fixed on the back of Jesse's head, raised a .44 caliber revolver and pulled the trigger. The shot entered just behind Jesse's right ear and exited through his jaw. James died instantly, collapsing to the floor without ever seeing his killer. Ford and his brother Charlie had ridden with the James gang, sharing in robberies and close calls. But the world was changing. Missouri's Governor Thomas Crittenden had quietly put a $10,000 bounty on Jesse James, half from the state and half from railroad companies desperate to end his raids. Secret letters and reward ledgers tracked the deal. The Ford brothers struck a bargain, Jesse's life for money and a full pardon. After the killing, the Fords surrendered themselves. They stood trial for murder, but the judge wasted no time. Within hours, a pardon signed by Governor Crittenden arrived. The Fords walked free, clutching a fraction of the promised reward. Newspapers across the country called it cowardice. Jesse James, the most hunted man in America, was murdered not by a sheriff or a Pinkerton, but by a man who sat at his table and called him friend. The betrayal echoed through dime novels and public outrage, forever staining the legend with the quiet violence of a back room and a single, well-aimed shot. August 2, 1876, Deadwood, Dakota Territory. Wild Bill Hickok sat at a corner table in Nuttall and Mann's saloon, cards in hand, his back to the door. For a man who'd survived shootouts across the West, it was an unusual slip. Hickok always warned against leaving your back exposed. That afternoon, the saloon buzzed with miners, gamblers, and drifters. Hickok joined a poker game, holding 2 black aces and 2 black eights. Some say that is where the legend of the dead man's hand begins, though the exact cards are still debated. Jack McCall, a local with a grudge and a belly full of whiskey, drifted in. He circled the room, watching Hickok. Witnesses later recalled McCall moving behind the poker table, revolver hidden in his coat. Without warning, McCall raised the gun and fired a single shot into the back of Hickok's head. The bullet exited through his right cheek. Hickok's cards scattered as he fell forward, dead before he hit the floor. The room froze. The most famous gunfighter in the West, killed in full view, never had a chance to draw. McCall tried to flee, but was caught in the chaos. News spread fast. Within hours, the story of Wild Bill's death was on every tongue. The irony was impossible to ignore. The man who outdrew so many fell to a bullet he never saw coming, surrounded by witnesses, his legend sealed by the shock of a public execution at the card table. John Wesley Hardin spent years boasting about his quick draw and deadly aim. By the summer of 1895, the man who once claimed to have killed more than 40 men found himself leaning over a dice table in El Paso's Acme Saloon, chasing luck instead of trouble. That night, Hardin's reputation filled the smoky room, but his gun belt did not. Witnesses later testified that his holster was empty, his pistol checked at a nearby hotel, forgotten for the moment as he argued over a dice roll in a woman's honor. John Selman, a local lawman with his own violent past, watched from across the bar. Earlier that evening, Hardin had pistol-whipped Selman's son during a quarrel. The grudge simmered. As Hardin laughed and tossed the dice, Selman slipped behind him, revolver drawn. Without warning, Selman fired 4 shots. The first bullet tore through the back of Hardin's head, shattering his eye. Another struck his chest. Hardin collapsed face first onto the dice table, dead before he could even look up. Patrons scattered, ducking for cover. The man who never backed down from a fight died unarmed, killed from behind in a room full of witnesses. Newspapers ridiculed the irony. Texas's most notorious gunfighter was gunned down while gambling, unable to draw. Police reports and court depositions confirmed the details. 4 shots, empty holster, no chance to defend himself. All the bravado in the world could not stop a bullet in the back. And Hardin's legend ended not in a duel, but in a saloon, with dice still rolling across the felt. Midnight settled over Fort Sumner on July 14, 1881. Inside Pete Maxwell's adobe house, Pat Garrett waited in near darkness with a rifle hidden beside him. Billy the Kid, just 21 years old, slipped in barefoot, a knife in one hand. He had spent the evening drifting between the shadows of the town, looking for food and a safe place to rest. As he stepped into Maxwell's bedroom, he saw a figure and called out in Spanish, "Who is it?" In that instant, Garrett fired a single shot. The bullet struck just above Billy's heart. He staggered, collapsed, and died on the floor, never firing a shot of his own. Garrett's own account, written the next year, claimed Billy was armed and dangerous, leaving him no choice. But others remembered only confusion and silence, no warning, no time for Billy to recognize the man in the dark. The room was so dim that even John Poe, one of Garrett's deputies, said he barely saw the kid before it was over. The next morning, a coroner's jury, 6 men from the community, examined the body. They confirmed it was Billy the Kid, the same young man who had outlasted the Lincoln County War. He was buried later that day, his boots removed and kept as grim souvenirs. Official records closed the case, but the legend only grew. Some whispered that Billy never saw it coming, that it was less a fair fight than an execution. Others pointed to Garrett's $500 reward as motive. The debate began that night in Fort Sumner and has never truly ended. On November 6, 1908, in the Bolivian mining town of San Vicente, 2 foreign bandits barricaded themselves inside a small adobe house. Bolivian soldiers and local police surrounded the building and traded gunfire through the night. Inside, one outlaw was wounded in the leg, matching the description of the Sundance Kid. As the hours dragged on, villagers reported hearing desperate shouts, then 2 final gunshots before dawn. When officials entered, they found both men dead, one shot between the eyes, the other with a bullet wound at the temple. No one could say for certain which body belonged to Butch Cassidy. The Bolivian police filed dispatches describing the men as North Americans and linking them to a recent payroll robbery. Percy Siebert, a mining engineer, claimed to recognize the outlaws, but there were no photographs, no fingerprints, and no formal identification. The bodies were laid to rest in unmarked graves at the edge of the village. For decades, Pinkerton detectives and U.S. diplomats tried to confirm the deaths. Their files collected rumors, not proof. Family stories complicated the picture. Cassidy's sister Lula insisted he returned to the United States under an assumed name, visiting her in Wyoming years later. Ranchers in Utah and Oregon swore they saw him long after 1908. Modern DNA tests on the Bolivian graves have failed to match Cassidy or Sundance's known relatives. Official records close the case in San Vicente, but the legend refuses to die. The truth remains buried somewhere between Bolivian police reports and the fading memories of those who claim to see Butch Cassidy ride away one last time. Their legends live on, but every myth hides a reality. In the end, trust and betrayal decide more fates than any gun. Today, we still romanticize outlaws and overlook the quiet costs of loyalty lost. History warns us, no legacy escapes the shadows that follow. Share your thoughts below.